Welcome to another episode of Drafters TV presented by Drafters Fantasy Sports. My name is Ben Hauver. I am the host of this show. If you're unaware, Drafters is the premier site for best ball drafting. Best ball is an innovative format of fantasy football that focuses on one thing and one thing only, drafting. You don't set lineups, you don't make trades or free agent pickups. In best ball, you have one responsibility: to draft the best team possible. At the end of every week, your highest producing players will automatically be entered into your starting lineup, and you will compete with your league mates to score the most points over a 16-week season. You can download the Drafters app now for both iOS and Android, where you will find best ball drafts for as low as $1.11 all the way up to the 109s for the big ballers out there. New leagues are starting all the time, so get in there and get drafting. On today's show, I am going to be joined once again by Peter Overzet. We are going to dive deep into the wide receiver position for best ball, how to handle it, and how my rankings differ from Drafters ADP, all while giving the viewers out there some insight on how to profit off of these market inefficiencies. This is part 3 of a 4-part series. You can go back and find the quarterback and running back videos on this YouTube channel. Our final video looking at the tight end position will be coming out soon, so make sure you mash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and don't miss out on a single piece of content. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Peter Overzet, welcome back to the show. How are you doing this afternoon?
Thanks, man. I'm doing good. We are getting into my favorite position in all of fantasy football. We know with quarterbacks, there's late round QB. It gets devalued a little bit. Running back is kind of such a free-for-all at points, but we're getting to the juicy bits here, the wide receivers. I'm excited. Yes,
I am as well. And, listen, for the first 2 episodes of this series, we opened up by, asking you a couple questions, getting to know the man behind the clout a little bit better. But today, we're going to try something a little bit different, Peter. We're going to play a word association game, a little something I cooked up. I'm going to set you up with a handful of adjectives and or descriptive terms. You're going to give me the first wide receiver that comes to your mind when you hear them. This is a speed round. Get through as many as we can. Are you ready?
Yes, I have one question. I'm just saying the name, or do I have to offer a little justification of why they come to mind?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, I'll let it go, but I understand the spirit of this is speed, but you know me, I like to talk, so I might find myself justifying the pick.
Hey, no worries. All right, let's do it. In 3, 2, 1, and your first word? Generational. We're going with my favorite wide receiver right now, A.J. Brown. Generational talent. Let's go. Uncontainable. Let's go with Mike Evans. Mike Evans in the red zone. It does not matter how good of a defensive back you are not going to be able to contain Mike Evans on a 50-50 ball. No, you're not. Number 3, elusive.
Okay, I'm going to go with Amari Cooper. I think he's one of the best, if not the best, route runners in the game right now. Constantly getting separation. Very elusive.
Dominative.
Okay, so that sounds like a grown-ass man to me. Let's go with Devontae Adams. He dominates targets in Green Bay and is very likely to be the highest-scoring fantasy receiver this year.
He certainly does. How about efficacious?
Okay. This one is a little ambiguous. It could go anyway. You know what? I'm going to spin this as Jarvis Landry, right? Ooh. This is like a desired effect. It's not always, gorgeous or pretty, but he gets the job done. Landry.
He certainly does. How about underrated?
Right now, I think ADP on him is ridiculous, and that's Tyler Boyd. I think he's very underrated right now.
Okay. How about overrated?
I will say, let's see here. Who is overrated? You know what? I think people are getting really, really hype on Allen Robinson, who I like, but I'm just not sure if his situation is that much different than it was last year.
All right, and then accurately rated, perfectly rated by the community.
Let's not do a guy at the top because that's a little too easy. Ooh, man, this is hard. Come on, Peter, speed. Let's say Devontae Parker. I think, his ADP has settled in a reasonable range. I think there's upside, but people also understand the risks and stuff with the new quarterback situation. So yeah, I'm going to say Devontae Parker is properly rated right now.
All right, final stretch, 3 more. Fierce.
Fierce. Okay, who's fierce? You know who's fierce? Stephon Diggs is fierce. You see him on Twitter. He's constantly chirping at people. He goes up and he plays bigger than his size. That's a fierce man.
All right. Equanimous, not like St. Brown, but somebody who's well-balanced.
Okay, so I can't go with MVS. Well-balanced. I mean, this is probably the chalk answer, but let's go with DeAndre Hopkins. I feel like he can win in so many different ways. He has enough speed to get behind the defense. He can also win in the short area. He is very balanced.
All right, and then finally, overtly loquacious.
Okay, well, this one's kind of easy right now because Michael Thomas will chirp back at anyone who even moderately slights him online or in any which way. So let's go with Michael Thomas being the online overly loquacious man.
And that was it, man. That was good. That's exactly how I envisioned that. You were pretty good with that right off the top. I like
that.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, good stuff there. Let's get right into it because, as much as I'd like to just chat, we have a lot of wide receivers to cover. There are more fantasy viable wide receivers than any other position. That's an unquestionable truth. So we're going to get right into it right here, and we're going to start off right now with my top 8 wide receivers in order. From 1 to 8, we have Devontae Adams at 1, Michael Thomas at 2, Tyreek Hill 3, Nuke Hopkins 4, Chris Godwin 5, Kenny Golladay making the jump up to 6, Julio Jones down at 7, and Odell Beckham capping off the list at 8. What stands out to you about this list of guys?
Yeah, so the things that I would say would jump out to me would be, I think you're higher on consensus than Golladay, right?
I am. Yeah, Golladay is going as the wide receiver 9. I've got him at 6. It's not a crazy jump, but I am definitely higher on him.
And then you're also got to be higher on consensus with Odell, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say those are the 2 that jump out to me. There are a couple of guys that I would personally bump up into this tier if they were my rankings. But the thing is it's hard to get in too strong of like a pitchfork argument about any of these because it is really flat. Like once you remove kind of the targets for Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas, like you can really start to make cases for a bunch of these guys. And I think that's what we're gonna do here today is I'll nitpick some of the players you have up here.
Yeah, that's fine. For me, the top 3. I don't have too much to say about that. Like, I think that you could really go in either way. Yeah, like Adams and Thomas, or maybe, a step above Tyreek Hill. But especially in best ball, Tyreek Hill's going to give you those massive ceiling weeks. So, any of those top 3 guys, I'm totally fine with going there. DeAndre Hopkins at 5, I've got him at 4. But I think the general, tone of the DeAndre Hopkins discussion right now is relatively negative, which I'm a little bit surprised about considering how productive he's been with many lesser quarterbacks than Kyler Murray. I mean, are you down on Hopkins, up on Hopkins? How do you feel about him?
So Hopkins is tricky, right? Because no one can deny, going from Deshaun Watson to Kyler Murray, that's probably a wash, Kyler Murray on the ascension. The Cardinals, we knew last year they wanted to run the air raid offense. They ended up kind of reverting to a more run-heavy offense towards the end of the year, but kind of all the moves they made seemed to signal they want to go more pass-heavy. The thing that concerns me is just a macro-level trend of wide receivers who change teams historically underproduce their career averages when they change teams. So I think there just has to be some natural caution with this. And the fact, too, we did see last year the way the air raid is intended to work with 4 wide receivers. Like, the quarterback isn't forcing the ball to a target, right? They are looking for whoever is getting open within that scheme. And that's why we saw last year guys like Damiere Byrd having, 8 target games out of the blue, and someone like Christian Kirk's production being a little all over the place, even though most people agreed he was the best wide receiver in the offense. So I think your hope, if you're drafting DeAndre Hopkins at 4, is that the efficiency of the offense offsets perhaps a little bit more volatility with his targets. But it's really hard not to love the spot.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said about the targets and the way the air raid offense functions. I will say that I think there is a difference between, the desire they're going to have to force the ball to DeAndre Hopkins versus the desire they're going to have to force it to Christian Kirk. No shade to Christian Kirk, but they are two totally different tiers of player. And responding to the point you said about teams who struggle in their first year switching teams, that I think is one of the reasons why we see Odell Beckham pushed further down the ADP, right? He's going at 11. I've got him up at 8. He had a down year last year. There's no denying that. But before that, he was a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy points per game every single year since he entered the league, including 3 years where he was top 3 in that category.
Right.
I think that he has a pretty clear shot to be the overall wide receiver 1 if things break right for him, better than any of the guys going around him, better than DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, any of those guys. I think that Odell Beckham could be the wide receiver 1 overall, which that upside is why I'm willing to take him there.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone could disagree that Odell has the talent level to be the number 1 overall. I mean, we've all seen it. The reason why I don't necessarily think it's realistic is because, Devontae Adams, I mean, who's he competing for targets with? It's like Alan Lazard and Jay Sternberger, and, they're going to run the ball 30 times a game, it seems. So he doesn't have a ton of competition. Michael Thomas, very little competition. I guess Emmanuel Sanders and Jared Cook, who are veterans. Mm-hmm. But with Odell, like Jarvis Landry is a real threat to targets, and he was just the better producer last year and Baker Mayfield's preferred target. And then on top of that, we know how much this team still has an identity where they want to run the ball. But to your credit, if you remove Odell's season last year, you'd look at this ranking and be like, this is way too low. And so this ranking, I'm not saying you're hedging, but you're kind of splitting the difference on what Odell has shown us versus what happened last year. And it's like, I feel like your ranking, it's either going to be like an insane steal because he's going to revert back to, 2018 Odell, or it's more of the same and it's a bust at that price. So it's one of those classic, boom bust picks, and how much do you want to clackety clack and roll the dice?
That is very fair. But again, pointing back to the discussion we had in our running back episode, just because I have him ranked at 8 doesn't mean that I'm going to take him as the 8th wide receiver off the board. With the lower ADP, I think that gives you a chance to get him later than that, even with the expectation for higher results. We can move on in a second here. The only other one that I really want to hit on in this tier is Julio Jones. I'm obviously low on him. He's going as the wide receiver 5. I've got him down at 7. And it's pretty simple. I would just rather be out a year early than be on him a year too late. It isn't really analytically based. He's a future Hall of Famer, physical specimen, all that stuff. But, he's 31 years old. Things change fast in the NFL. Everybody's on the Calvin Ridley bandwagon. I mean, am I too low on Julio Jones? Because frankly, I want to move him lower, but I don't think I can. I
don't think you are. I think you have him right around there. I other than you being higher than Kenny Golladay than I would be, I think that's right. I wouldn't want to take him over your top 4, Devontae, MT, Tyreek Hill, Hopkins, and Godwin. Like that, I think that's a very reasonable ranking. To your second point of wanting to push him down further, then it definitely gets a little more tricky. I don't know which guys you could comfortably put him below. And I guess the real question, right, is we know wide receivers eventually fall off a cliff. The question is, does he have, the Larry Fitzgerald longevity in him? Or is he the kind of like Megatron type player where when it goes, it goes? And then the other thing that's interesting is, everyone is extremely excited about Calvin Ridley this year, and I think rightfully so. And we know that 2 wide receivers can succeed in tandem in a pass-happy offense like the Falcons. But if you are projecting a really big leap again for Calvin Ridley this year, where a lot of people have him ranked like you do as a wide receiver 2, then I think you naturally have to push Julio down a little bit.
Yeah, that is a fair point. And I would like to move him down, but like you said, there's really just no justification other than just trolling, so I can't do it. Well, I'm leaving him there at 7.
Well, another thing that's kind of interesting just from a roster construction standpoint with these wide receivers is again, we know how many people are targeting running backs in these first 2 rounds. And it's interesting, the people who end up in the range where they take Julio Jones, it's not necessarily allowing for the best overall roster construction, even aside from just the, evaluating the talent and the production. So Julio Jones is, I think, a riddle in best balls, because it's like, okay, I'm looking at the draft I did on Drafters with the industry stuff, and he went at pick 12 right before a string of running backs, Kenyon Drake, Miles Sanders, Eckler. From a roster construction standpoint, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow, knowing some of those other wide receivers are available to you. So, yeah, Julio Jones is tricky.
Yeah, and I would take all 3 of those running backs ahead of him 10 out of 10 times. But let's move on. We got a lot of names to cover here. 9 through 18 here. I've got Allen Robinson at 9, Juju Smith-Schuster at 10, Cooper Kupp at 11, Mike Evans at 12, Amari Cooper 13, A.J. Brown 14, DJ Moore down at 15, Adam Thielen 16, Calvin Ridley, and then Robert Woods to cap off this tier. What stands out to you?
Yeah, so again, most of this looks pretty reasonable to me. I am higher than market on A.J. Brown and DJ Moore, our 2 initialed guys here at 14 and 15. Both of them, I actually think the A.J. Brown ranking is actually pretty fair. DJ Moore is the guy I would definitely have higher. And I'm extremely high on him, like as in I would swap him in Odell's rankings if I did my own. And the case for me for DJ Moore is, so last year he was 8th in total yards, he was 10th in wide receiver targets and 13 in air yards, and his 2 quarterbacks were Cam Newton and Kyle Allen, and they had some of the worst yards per attempt averages in the league. And the other thing that's interesting too is the beginning of the year, the team was better and they weren't throwing as much. But if you look at the splits about halfway through the season, when they started to perform worse on defense, he was on a 171 target pace, which is pretty absurd. And now they lose Luke Kuechly and they bring in Teddy Bridgewater, which I think is an upgrade over Kyle Allen for sure. And then when you do a kind of a macro look at DJ Moore, I mean, there's a list of wide receivers who have had over 1,950 yards. I know it's a funny arbitrary threshold to get him in there and not say 2,000, but if he wouldn't have gotten hurt, he was only like 34 yards away from getting 2,000 yards anyways. But anyways, the company for 1,950 yards before turning 23, this is the list. Juju, Mike Evans, Amari, Larry Fitz, Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, and Josh Gordon. So my thing is just, I think he's an elite talent. I think he was an elite prospect. I think he's set up well, and I think he's gonna make a leap this year. But I know you're down on him, so I'll give you the floor to rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, just about everything you said I think is very valid. And truthfully, I like DJ Moore. I'm not trying to sound like a hater here, but look, last year he finished as the wide receiver 16, 17th in points per game, and really right there is the range that I like him in. Even ahead of that, he finished as wide receiver 16, and I've got him at 15. I think that he will be a very serviceable mid to high-end range wide receiver too, but I'm not going to take him in the top 10 ahead of guys like Odell, Allen Robinson, Juju, who I think all in their own way have potential to be in the top 5 wide receivers, and I don't see that with DJ Moore. Yes, Teddy Bridgewater is an upgrade on Kyle Allen, but I don't believe personally that Teddy Bridgewater is a very good quarterback, or at least that he is no better than your Tyrod Taylor or Marcus Mariotas of the world. And yeah, it's just, if I'm going to be taking a wide receiver in the top 10, I want their ceiling to be top 5, and I don't believe that this year with Teddy Bridgewater behind center that DJ Moore has that upside.
Yeah, he's a guy that you want, I think, to fall for me in the trying to get him in the late second, early third. Again, in the draft I've been referencing, I passed over him at 2-8, because I wanted to grab George Kittle, which is more of a roster construction thing. But I would have definitely have nabbed him coming back at 3-4. Instead, I grabbed A.J. Brown. But yeah, I agree with your point that you don't want to be reaching over some of these other guys, but once those kind of top 7 guys are off the board, like after we were just talking that Julio Jones tier, he's a primary target for me, where I kind of feel like I know what I'm getting from, Allen Robinson and even Juju if things go back, but there just feels like there's still some meat on the bone for DJ Moore to kind of continue this ascension when he's just been nothing but productive every step of the way.
Do you have any concern about Robbie Anderson addition to the Panthers?
I don't, just because of the way, in a lot of ways, Robbie Anderson will be, running a lot of the routes that Curtis Samuel was last year. Curtis Samuel was, I want to say, wasn't he like top 10 in air yards there, either on the season or for a stretch? So he was clearing.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, so to me, it's more like Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel are going to probably cannibalize each other's production a bit, whereas I think DJ Moore is going to kind of establish himself as that alpha wide receiver one in the offense, and especially with Greg Olsen gone as well.
Yep, that, good DJ Moore talk there. I like it that, made a really strong argument for him. I will be looking at these rankings later on tonight and thinking about this. Now, how do you feel about the difference between Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods here? I've got Kupp up at 11, Robert Woods at 18. I've seen a lot on Twitter where people just sort of, thinking that Robert Woods is clearly, the value between these two guys when you look at their ADPs. But to me, Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 2 for the first 8 weeks of the season, right behind Michael Thomas. I think that his ceiling is ultimately higher.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the Kupp over Woods. I like that call. I do think I would probably slide Kupp down a little more just because I wouldn't be so confident that it's for sure Kupp over Woods, to where I would maybe want to squish them a little closer together. But yeah, I still don't know if we ever got a good answer for why he was so underutilized for the Rams down the stretch. I always remember they had that London game. I want to say it was against the Jags, where he just went nuclear, like 200 yards and 2 TDs or whatever. And then things just completely started to fade. They started to use the double tight end sets with Tyler Higbee more. Woods was the more consistent producer. It was just really, really bizarre, especially when their running game wasn't working either. But I do think he is still like the better talent with more overall upside. But I do think there's some uncertainty with what happened to him down the stretch last year.
Yeah, if Sean McVay is even, half as sharp as we all made him out to be to, start his tenure with the Rams, then I think he's going to reflect on the second half of the year last year and think that, yeah, maybe I need to prioritize getting Cooper Kupp out there more than Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett. Hopefully he does come to that realization. Is there anything else in this tier that you want to cover before we move on?
The one thing that I feel like no one's talking about him, which is, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't have my finger on the pulse like I think I do, but it just doesn't seem like people are talking about Mike Evans. I know people are excited about Godwin. People are excited about that offense. People are hype on Gronk. We'll talk about that on the tight end show. People love Keyshawn Vaughn. They love Tom Brady. But no one seems to be being like, I love Mike Evans with Tom Brady, which is just weird to me. That he's not kind of a sexy pick in this range, but I think he's going to deliver a wide receiver one, production, and that's right where you have him here as a top 12 wide receiver as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I were going to take a stab at why I think that is, it's probably just because there is like a misconception, frankly, out there that Tom Brady can't throw the deep ball anymore. I mean, the numbers would tell you that that's not true, but I think that is sort of the public perception of where Brady's at. And, I think it's fair to wonder if he will lose some of that arm strength. I mean, he's 42, 43 at this point. Maybe he's only 41. No disrespect. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, as these quarterbacks get older, it's very, likely that their arm strength is going to diminish. So, with Chris Godwin, sort of playing that middle of the field role more often and Mike Evans strictly being on the outside, I think that is probably why you feel that sort of, attention going away from Mike Evans. But yeah, I mean, I like him as a wide receiver one, and I wouldn't be shocked if he outperformed my ranking of 12.
Yeah, he, I think, I do agree he's probably going to lose a little bit on the, the Jameis style, chucking it down the field. But Mike Evans has never been a big yards after catch guy anyways, and where I think he could make up for that are, Jameis Winston was a jump ball specialist, right? He's just chucking it, where we do know Mike Evans running on the outside has that kind of back shoulder catch 50-50 game, and I think Brady is going to be able to really dial in with him on the perimeter and especially in the red zone. So I think you got to be pretty excited about Evans with Brady if you're excited for Godwin with Brady.
Yeah, that is fair. Let's move on to our next group of players here, 19 through 28. Starting at 19, I've got Keenan Allen, T.Y. Hilton, Stephon Diggs, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Jarvis Landry, Hollywood Brown at 25, Devontae Parker, DJ Chark, and Cortland Sutton at 28. For me, this tier is less about the players in it and more about the opportunity to construct a strong roster. It's a good time to add versatility to your roster, in my opinion. If you waited on wide receiver and you need safety, you need to lock in some production at wide receiver, you can grab Keenan Allen, you can grab Tyler Lockett, you could grab Jarvis Landry. If you are looking for that potential guy who can have a monster season but isn't being drafted highly, go for Diggs, go for Metcalf, go for Hollywood Brown. I think that this is a time to focus on the type of player you need for the roster more so than the player themselves. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree, especially because this is like a hodgepodge of players that have very different profiles of like, we kind of know what we're going to get from Keenan Allen and T.Y. Hilton, and even Tyler Lockett to another extent, Jarvis Landry too. And then we have some of these breakout guys, the Chark, the Sutton, the DK Metcalf. Can they continue on what they did last year? So it does have to do a lot with your risk tolerance. I'm always inclined to chase upside here. I want to try to get in on another secondary breakout from Chark and Sutton, even though those teams did add rookies this year that are going to steal valuable targets. Same with DK Metcalf. Those are the guys I'm looking at. Marquise Brown, do they expand his role a little bit because the efficiency in that offense is out of this world? So this is a bias I personally have when drafting, where I'm always chasing kind of the younger thing. I use the phrase meat on the bone. I'm like always like, is there some meat on the bone that's not baked into their current price where they could really perform this? And so I kind of gravitate to those guys where I really do think where you have Hilton and Lockett is pretty reflective of where they're most likely end up at season's end, where I could see a Metcalf, a Chark, a Sutton finishing as a top 15 wide receiver.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, to the point about meat on the bone, I want to ask you, do you feel like Marquise Hollywood Brown has the potential to have that Tyreek Hill-esque wide receiver one season if things break right for him? Because he was productive in a year that, he wasn't healthy the entire time, and that, the Ravens passed at an insanely low rate. If they pass even a little bit more, Hollywood Brown's target share should remain pretty prevalent in that offense. So they didn't really add much besides Devin Duvernay, which I don't think is any major threat to Hollywood Brown. He's more like a Willie Snead replacement. So, how do you feel about Hollywood Brown? Do you think that there is a scenario where he could break into, the top 12 potentially?
I do. Like you mentioned, they didn't add much there. I do think Mark Andrews is, the de facto number one option there and probably functions as kind of the number one wide receiver. But, Marquise Brown, one, dealt with injuries last year. Two, like you said, they were an extremely run-heavy offense. But when he was playing, his efficiency was through the roof. And when you have an offense that is pulling linebackers away because they constantly have to worry about Lamar Jackson tucking it and running it, that presents real issues for the secondary, to where Marquise Brown is going to be getting a lot of single coverage. And yeah, if that volume just ticks up a little bit, I think we'll really see the production start to skyrocket. So yeah, I for some reason I haven't been getting a ton of him in drafts. But I think it's just kind of these weird pockets that I've been falling in. But he's definitely a target for me in that kind of 6th, 7th round range where you can get him right now.
Yeah, he is going as the wide receiver 33 off the board. I've got him at 25, so I'm ending up with him quite a bit in that range that you described. I want to talk for a minute about Jarvis Landry. Landry to me is low-key the most underappreciated fantasy asset just about every single year. I mean, he's always cheap in terms of ADP relative to production. He's going as the wide receiver 30 in drafts right now. I've got him right at the edge of wide receiver 2-3, ranked at 24. And, I get it. He's not super sexy. People are going to say, well, what's his ceiling? But if you look at the numbers, he's finished as a top 12 wide receiver 50% of the time, 3 out of his 6 years. So he does have a legitimate ceiling, and he hasn't finished outside the top 18 since his rookie season. If your goal is to beat ADP, then Landry is probably as close to a lock to do that as any player in the NFL.
Yeah, it's true. And it is surprising for you because you're very hype on both Odell and Landry. Do you think that they both can, have, Odell a top 5 season and Jarvis Landry be a wide receiver too, without cannibalizing each other? Or do you think there's a little give and take there?
I do think it's possible. Yeah, if Odell has that ceiling season where he's top 5, is Landry going to finish, in the top 12? Probably not. Is he going to still finish in the top 18? I wouldn't be surprised. And, is he going to finish higher than his ADP as wide receiver 30? I think absolutely. So, regardless of how well Odell sort of, whether or not he reaches his ceiling, I think that Landry's value is insulated in a way just because of what he does in an NFL level.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you too, because it was a debate for a long time, even back when he was in Miami, of is Jarvis Landry good? But at some point, you just have to recognize that commanding targets is a skill. And yeah, sure, they might not be the sexiest targets, but those still count. And whatever he's doing, it has put him in the good graces of the team, the coaches, the quarterback, and they want to feed him to move the chain. So yeah, you cannot argue with what Jarvis Landry has done year in and year out, and for multiple teams and multiple quarterbacks.
Yep, absolutely. Is there anything else in this tier you want to touch on?
I think that is about it. I love DJ Chark. I think we could see, he already broke out last year, but I think we could see that secondary breakout. I'm less concerned about Laviska Shenault really eating into his compared to, say, Jerry Jeudy eating into Cortland Sutton. I think that's, Jeudy was such an elite level prospect. And as much as I love Shenault, we'll probably even talk about him at the end of this show, I think DJ Chark just checks all those boxes as the alpha number 1 wide receiver. And I think he's going to kind of really crush this current draft slot or ADP slot.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have him slightly lower than ADP. He's going 23rd. I've got him at 27, but like I said, if I'm looking at this more as like what I need for each individual roster. If I want that upside pick in this range, I agree that DJ Chark is likely that guy. And totally agree with the point about, Jeudy and Sutton versus Chark and Laviska Shenault. Oh my God, I can't say it. Laviska Shenault.
It's a tough one.
Chark just does something different than, Westbrook and Shenault and Conley and all those guys. So I do think that his value is completely insulated as well. Let's move on to our next group. This is a larger group of guys, 29 through 42. I will quickly run through the names here. Starting at 29, Tyler Boyd, got A.J. Green right after him. Scary Terry at 31. Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, my guy, Darius Slayton at 34. Julian Edelman, Deebo Samuel, Marvin Jones, John Brown, Jamison Crowder, Michael Gallup, Christian Kirk, and then Deontay Johnson, the man behind the hype, down at 42. So what stands out to you in this tier?
Yeah, you haven't, if you have been on Twitter at all, you would have Deontay Johnson in your top 10 by now. What are you doing, Ben?
Yeah, I know. I got to update these rankings to reflect the last week of Twitter.
Yeah. This is another kind of hodgepodge chunk here, right, where you can really take cracks at your roster construction and kind of what you're looking for. Are you trying to raise your floor, with guys like a Julian Edelman or a Marvin Jones, or are you trying to really shoot for ceiling and hit on some of these guys that, again, to use that phrase, have some meat on the bone? I love Christian Kirk. I think that, again, another prospect who has been very productive for his age and how long he's been in the NFL, in a great situation now where we saw he wasn't capable of being the alpha wide receiver and kind of dealing with that. But now we're asking him to play the Will Fuller role alongside DeAndre Hopkins in an offense that wants to go deep and air it out and has a quarterback that can actually get him the ball there. I think he is undervalued right now. I've been scooping him up in basically every draft. In the Drafters Industry one, I took him in the 8th round. So I like Christian Kirk. I like Terry McLaurin on the more expensive side of this range. Again, everything that Terry McLaurin did in his rookie year, considering it was with Case Keenum and Dwayne Haskins, just has really shown what an elite talent he is. Some of the tougher ones for me is, again, my age bias. I'm always going to be out on Edelman. Even this price isn't too bad. We don't know who the quarterback is. We don't know about his health. We don't know what this offense is going to look like. I'm looking elsewhere. I'd rather take a shot on these younger guys, Debo, Christian Kirk, Gallup, McLaurin, any of those guys. But and then I know we got your boy here, Darius Slayton, another second-year guy that seems like he could have a secondary breakout. Why are you so high on Slayton?
I mean, I have to come out and say it. I just have a scary obsession with this guy, Darius Slayton, or as I like to call him, Godius Slayton,
Whoa.
a.k.a. Young Slay. When it's all said and done and I'm a few hundred best ball drafts deep at the end of this season, if Godius isn't my highest owned player, I will be disappointed in myself. The way I look at it, Sterling Shepard, he had his chance, but at this point, I think his career upside is around the Tyler Boyd range, and he could even, equally as likely be Jordan Matthews and wash out. Golden Tate, I love him, but he's about to be 32, and, he's exclusively a slot player. Darius Slayton, 6'2", athletic beast out of Auburn. He's going to come in. He's going to be the Giants wide receiver one, and he is going to smash his wide receiver 43 ADP, and he's probably going to smash my ranking of him at 34. I love the kid. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, and his price is very affordable right now. I think in general, everyone is, outside of Saquon, I think people are just kind of undervaluing this Giants offense, and especially for best ball purposes, where Daniel Jones has shown he's more than capable of popping off for these huge weeks. And yeah, like Evan Ingram is great. Golden Tate is great. I should preface what I say great. I mean solid. But yeah. Darius Slayton is really the guy, the lid lifter. He has the physical tools to kind of take a DJ Chark type leap with his size and his ability to win in a couple facets of the game. So I love at that price. I mean, in the Drafters Industry Draft, he went in the 12th round. Which is very, very cheap. I had already pivoted over to some other positions because I like to hammer wide receivers in the rounds 3 through 8 or 9. But depending on your construction, if you were doing something a little more different there, I think Slayton's a priority target there in the 10th and 11th.
Yeah, if Slayton is available in the 10th and 11th, then I'm not in that draft. The only other thing I really want to hit on in this tier, I think, is like, how do you differentiate between guys who it's just really hard to figure out? Like, for example, Tyler Boyd and AJ Green, I have them back-to-back. Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, I have them back-to-back. So, these situations that are very unclear as of right now, are you going back to the age bias that you mentioned and you're going to go Boyd over Green? How do you navigate tough choices like that? Yeah,
I generally am. I agree they're tough choices, but I am kind of just going to break ties in favor of upside. I think Tyler Boyd still could ascend to a more kind of target hog status, and AJ Green with injury concerns, and I think he's also, I don't know his exact contract situation, if they could still get out of it. It just doesn't seem like A.J. Green is, the focus of this team right now. And I love Tyler Boyd, too. Another guy who's just, I think, kind of our generation's Jarvis Landry, as in kind of constantly commanding targets, but not necessarily getting the respect for it. And then Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller is tough. I mean, Brandon Cooks was such a great prospect coming in the league. He's produced very well, but he's also always played with great quarterbacks, and now he's been on he's on his like 4th or 5th different team at this point. To me, I'm always going Fuller there, because with Fuller, the question has never been the talent. it has always been, is he healthy? If Will Fuller is healthy for 16 games, I think even you would probably agree he will smash this 32nd ranking for you.
I mean, he would be in my top 20 if you could promise me that he would, be available for 16 games. Between Fuller and the concussions that Brandon Cooks deals with, both of these, it's probably one of the most injury-prone wide receiver cores in the league, which is why, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I find myself grabbing up Kenny Stills often in the late rounds because I think that there's a good chance that, one or both of these guys will miss stretches during the year.
Yeah. And the thing that kind of, I think, offsets this a little bit is, you obviously always have the injury concerns, but I think he will command more targets per game this year without DeAndre Hopkins. Cooks will obviously handle some of those, but Cooks isn't a DeAndre Hopkins level talent to where he's going to be commanding 10 to 12 targets a game. And, Will Fuller is basically the poster child for best ball. Like, I don't really like him in redraft, but I prefer him in best ball. So that cliche still holds true there. Like, at the very least, you're going to get 5 or 6 just monster weeks. I mean, he had that week last year. It was like, week 5 or week 6 versus the Falcons where he...
I know exactly what week you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just absolutely went nuclear. And that's what you're getting with Will Fuller. So if you're telling me that's the floor, like 3 or 4 like monster games, even with the injuries, I'll take that. I think even RotoViz had done work about his win rates last year were really solid, even with the missed games. So I love taking a shot on Will Fuller, but only in best ball.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully you were on team Will Fuller in cash that week when he dropped 50 points on DraftKings or whatever it was, something insane. But let's move on to our next tier here. Tiers players 43 through 53. Starting with 43, I've got Sterling Shepard. 44, Big Mike Williams. 45, Preston Williams. Jalen Reagor and Henry Ruggs back-to-back after that. Anthony Miller, Mecole Hardman. Maybe a bit of a shocker, Alan Lazard all the way up at 50. Justin Jefferson, 51. Robbie Anderson, 52. And then CeeDee Lamb at 53. We're starting to get in the range where we've got rookies and things of that nature. How do you feel about this tier?
Yeah, this is another tier. It has a lot of upside in it. This is kind of like the question mark tier where it's like, if things really broke right, any of these guys could even be like a wide receiver too in the right circumstances. Again, structurally, I'm normally not drafting wide receivers here. I like your ranking of Alan Lazard. I got him in the 15th round of the drafters draft, and I think he's going underlooked as kind of that second target there next to Devontae Adams. But in general, these guys aren't the pocket where I'm drafting wide receivers because I'm scrambling to fill out my running back core after ignoring it for so long. I think the big theme here that's interesting is how are these rookies going to produce this year? And, Jalen Reagor is in a great spot for opportunity, great quarterback. Henry Ruggs, first overall wide receiver, should be able to see a lot of target. And again, he's another poster child for best ball where it's like, yeah, he might have some low-scoring weeks, but when he does score, it's probably going to be some splash play variety there. So I am just concerned. I've bought into this narrative of, wide receivers do need time with their quarterbacks to build that rapport. And I'm worried with the kind of COVID-shortened offseason and training camp and rookie mini camps that I'm just not certain if these rookies are going to be able to come in and produce right away at the level we would want. So from this tier, I'd prefer to break ties in favor of Mike Williams, Preston Williams, Anthony Miller, Hardman, and Lazard over the Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Reagor, Ruggs guys.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that the point you made about COVID and potentially slowing down these rookies' initial start to the career is very prevalent. I saw a tweet the other day that says, these coaches might be able to start getting into the buildings as early as, a week or two from now. So, the pace at which the offseason progresses is going to either push some of these guys up or down, because I think that is something very important that we need to look at specific to this year and this season, the way that, the situation we're in societally. So that is very important. And the other thing I want to say about this is that I agree, usually in this range when the wide receiver 40 through 50 are going off the board, I'm focusing on filling out my quarterbacks, my tight ends, the rest of my roster, not drafting wide receivers because wide receiver is so deep. However, a lot of these guys specifically, I have much higher than their rankings. For example, Jalen Reagor, I have at 46. He's going at 59. Allen Lazard, I have at 50. He's going all the way down at 69. So while I have these guys in this range, you don't have to draft them in this range. So yeah, I will be passing up, this part of the draft in ADP and still landing these guys that I expect to be beating their ADP a few rounds later.
Yeah, and again, it depends on kind of your roster construction. Again, I just keep using the industry draft from a few weeks ago I did with Drafters as a reference point. I took Lazard in the 15th, and I took Shenault in the last round, the 18th. And I do think that's because we can't have certainty. Like, if anyone thinks they have certainty about which one of these rookies is going to produce the best, or even some of these second-year guys, like, we just don't know. There's a reason they're ranked this far down, and there's a reason why they're kind of bucketed together. But I do think you want to split your exposures across these guys. Like, I look at a lot of these names that we just ran through, and I have interest in all of them. And, I want to just mix around my exposure. And maybe that's a cop-out answer. People love it when you plant your flag and say, Mecole Hardman in every draft. But no, I want a little Ruggs here at the end of the draft. I want a little Hardman. I want a little Miller. And there's always going to be a couple guys I'm a little lower on than market that I probably don't end up with. But this whole tier is interesting to me. And guys I want to have a little, as they say, sprinkle of.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move on in a second here. I just want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on Lazard. You talked about getting him in the 15th round. I'm scooping him up in that range pretty often. The way I look at it is that last year, if you were doing these best ball drafts, people were taking Geronimo Allison and MVS, in the 8th and 9th rounds just to get exposure to that guy who was going to be opposite Davante Adams. Now, it turned out it was neither of them. But now you're getting the opportunity to draft a player who's in that same situation as the wide receiver 69. And look, I don't think that there's one team in the NFL where it matters more if you have the quarterback's trust than the Green Bay Packers. And one of the reasons, maybe they were just playing PR damage control, but right after the draft, when the Packers failed to take a wide receiver like everybody thought they were going to do, one of the things Matt LaFleur said was it's because they have faith in what Allen Lazard can do. I don't know if he's talented, that's not my forte, but I think that the opportunity is absolutely there, and there's going to be value for whoever it is that's playing opposite Adams there in the Packers offense.
Yeah, I think Lazard is just priced at his floor right here at like the, where you're getting him at ADP. And, we keep talking about what the offensive philosophy is going to be of these teams. The Packers are signaling to us that they want to run the ball. But again, Aaron Rodgers, first of all, are they going to get the game scripts that allow them to do that? And when they don't, we know Aaron Rodgers is plenty willing to chuck it, and he's going to prefer to do it. He's going to be audibling out of runs and wanting to throw it. And when teams finally realize, like, we just got to double cover Davante Adams because he's killing us all game, who is going to be the beneficiary? You can point to a couple guys, but I think Allen Lazard, like you said, has built up that trust with Rodgers more than any other pass catcher after Davante Adams. And I think it's just all upside at this price for Lazard. And again, to use our cliche, especially in best ball, you do not have to guess the weeks where Davante Adams gets double, triple covered and Lazard pops off. You just get those points at a 15th round price tag, which I love.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I said that was the last thing, but I just noticed one more thing I want to touch on. I had Michael Gallup in the last year we talked about a little bit lower, maybe a lot bit lower than his ADP ranking. I have Gallup at 40. His ADP is the wide receiver 31. And then I've got CeeDee Lamb at the end of this tier at wide receiver 53. His ADP is 41. The reasoning behind that is that I believe that Amari Cooper's role is pretty safe. I know that there's a lot of speculation on when the team will move on with him, if they'll move on from him with the CeeDee Lamb pick. But, for this year, I think Amari Cooper is going to dominate targets there. And then CeeDee Lamb, is just so talented. He might be the most talented wide receiver on that roster. I don't think that they're going to be able to keep him off the field for long, and I think that him and Gallup are going to sort of cannibalize each other. Do you think that I'm too low on these wide receiver 2 and 3 for Dallas, or have I got this situation right?
Yeah, I think it is a tricky situation. Again, we're always going to be wrong about this stuff. If I had to guess, I think we see kind of a flippening happen, halfway through the season where, Gallup is kind of operating as that traditional number 2, showing us his upside that we've seen. And then CeeDee Lamb, though, his talent, I think ultimately is going to be so undeniable that they're not going to be able to not feature this guy. And then I think it gets to get a little hairy with these guys are going to alternate having big games. All 3 of them, Amari, CeeDee, and Gallup. So I guess at these costs and these rankings, I'd probably just take a flyer on Lamb late and hope you get kind of the A.J. Brown season where, yeah, it's a little slow at the start, but then all of a sudden the big plays and the big games start coming, as opposed to maybe paying a top dollar price for Gallup and then have him fading. That said, his ADP has been dropping too, to the point where I do think he's a value if you're getting him in the 8th or 9th round. So I actually don't mind either of these guys at their current cost, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out over the offseason. If anything, maybe Amari is the one being overdrafted.
That's a very fair point. Very fair. Let's move on to this tier here, 54 through 65. Starting at 54, I have got N'Keal Harry, the Forgotten Man, 55, Golden Tate, 56, Alshon Jeffrey, Denzel Mims, Jerry Jeudy, Sammy Watkins, Rashad Perryman at 60, Curtis Samuel 61, Paris Campbell 62, Brandon Ayuk, Kenny Stills, and then Emmanuel Sanders at 65. What stands out to you of this group?
Yeah, from a roster construction standpoint, we're now in the range where, like, if you're just slightly higher than consensus on any of these guys, you're going to be able to get them. Again, I always kind of have the bias of wide receivers that I already know what they're capable of. It's hard for me to buy into a Corey Davis with A.J. Brown ascending. It's hard for me to buy into D.D. Westbrook when they draft Shenault, who I like a lot and I think is going to take a lot of the slot snaps. So I'm kind of tailing away from those guys. But then I look at someone like Emmanuel Sanders, who, again, traditionally my age bias would prevent me from drafting, but that seems like a pretty reasonable cost for a guy that we know still can play. I have that game that they had versus the Saints last year in the Dome where he popped off and he still looked like he had it, even at his age. And with Drew Brees as his quarterback and Michael Thomas commanding attention, I don't think that's a bad dart there. I know you mentioned Kenny Stills earlier. I think he's probably undervalued just based on targets. And again, he's an interesting best ball option with Fuller, Cooks, and Stills all having somewhat similar skill sets. So if they're used close to interchangeably, you're going to get a good return on that investment. So this is kind of a draft and pray kind of tier here, and I'm probably just going to keep shooting for that upside and stray away from these guys like a Cole Beasley who they bring in Diggs. He's a slot guy. If he doesn't get the volume, he's probably not going to produce. So that's kind of where I'm at. At this point in the draft, you're not losing your draft, but you can swing for the fences, and I think that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, to your point about the age bias, which I think I share a little bit of as well. Emmanuel Sanders, I have him at 65 in this range, but he's going all the way up at 47.
Yeah.
So yeah, if he was going in this range, that would be a fair price, but he's not. This ranking essentially means I'll have 0% exposure to him, and frankly, I'm okay with that. I agree 100% with the point. I'm not going to be taking the Cole Beasleys, the Corey Davises of the world in this range. I'm going to be taking a shot on guys that I think have the potential to, really have some blow-up weeks and contribute on the best ball roster because, let's face it, these are your wide receiver 6s, 7s, and 8s. If you're not busting on your early picks, it's going to be tough for these guys to break into your starting lineup at a frequent rate. So, I'm fine taking guys like, Denzel Mims, the ultimate question of talent versus Adam Gase's ability to hide talent and shelter talent. N'Keal Harry, a guy who, we were all excited about with an unknown quarterback now, can he do it? Maybe. We don't know the answer. So I'm going to be taking stabs at guys like that in this range, guys like Kenny Stills, guys like Brandon Ayuk, and fading the high floor, low ceiling guys.
Yep. No, I agree with that.
That is really all I've got. There's another tier here, but these are really players that aren't being drafted at all or their last round picks. Is there anybody that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about? We didn't really get into your boy Shenault. If you want to hop on the pedestal real quick and tell us why we need to be higher on him.
Yeah, I mean, part of my love for Shenault comes from a dynasty perspective, and that I've been scooping him up in so many drafts because he was an insane value kind of in the mid-second round when you consider his pedigree, where he was drafted. But I do like him from a redraft element. He falls into that bucket with the guys we talked about, Rager, Ruggs, Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, where it's like, one, maybe two of these guys is probably going to have a fantasy useful season in year one. It's just who it's going to be. And again, I used my 18th round pick on him in the recent drafters draft, and I'm happy to take a stab there and hope that you get, again, as kind of our benchmark, the AJ Brown end of season surge where, yeah, he might not be incredibly useful at the beginning, but he could be, legitimately winning you some weeks by the end of the season.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, do you think that Westbrook is just, dead to the world at this point? Because I remember last offseason, reading articles that he was a better route runner than Stephon Diggs and all this crazy stuff, and then he just completely busted. Now he's an afterthought. You can get him with one of your last two picks. I thought that he was pretty good going into last year. I was expecting a lot, got burned, but I wonder if, there's any merit in coming back to him this year.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I thought he was a pretty interesting talent, for a while too, even though as he kept burning us in DFS and season-long leagues. But what I kind of go back to is just ultimately these teams tell us what they think of these players with the decisions they make. And so when they, with the 41st overall pick, take a guy like Shenault, who does well after the slot, is really good yards after the catch, is this kind of jack of all trades skill set. He rushed for 7 touchdowns over his college career. And then the size he has, to me, that's signaling like, okay, we're done with Westbrook experiment in the slot. I'm sure he'll still be, a wide receiver 4 type. Him and Conley will probably, split some of those other snaps. But yeah, I think they are telling us like, hey, Shenault is our future, and Westbrook is now a role player for us, not a guy we're going to go out of our way to feed targets to.
All right. Peter, thank you for joining me. What a show. Almost an hour here, and I think we got a lot of good discussion in here. The DJ Moore, the Jarvis Landry talk, the Shenault talk, a lot of good stuff in this hour. We've got one more episode of this series coming. The tight end episode will be out soon, so make sure you subscribe, hit that notification button, and keep up to date on all the content that we will be pumping out on this Drafters YouTube channel for the duration of the off season. And yeah, make sure you follow Peter on Twitter. You won't regret it. At Peter Overzet. You can find me on Twitter at Ben Hauver. And that's all we've got for you guys. Thank you, and we will talk to you soon.